Great. Hey, everybody. This is Stephanie from Guiding Force Consulting, and I'm really excited for today's interview series with Dr. Keli Christopher. And Kelly, I would love to kick off our interview with you sharing with me a fun fact that most people don't know about you.
I am a big Disney World fan and I love going down there with my family. I have two kids and we really enjoy it. And I really enjoy it. It's more for me than the kids, to be honest. So,
They do a great job of mixing kid and adult activities down there
yep,
for sure.
yep, they do.
Why don't you share with me an introduction of yourself and the nonprofit that you started, the STEM Greenhouse?
Okay. Well, I'm Kelly Christopher. I am from Grand Rapids, Michigan, and I was born and raised here practically. And I left to go to college in North Carolina and to go into engineering. So I went into engineering at a historically Black college in North Carolina. Then I went to graduate school at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and I got my master's degree and my PhD in agricultural engineering. And at that time, I was the only Black person that has ever gotten a PhD in agricultural engineering from the University of Illinois. And technically, I still am. But yeah, so I had that experience. I went into engineering for a while, and then I had children and decided I wanted to start doing educational programming for children because honestly, I was doing a lot of that for my mom and our little mom groups and things. I was always doing STEM stuff, and I started a STEM business. Uh, but in my work in my business, I realized that I was mostly in communities that could afford a lot of opportunities for their children. And I decided to start a nonprofit so that I could better access children of color, vulnerable children in poverty. And yeah, so that's why I started the STEM Greenhouse. That was in 2014. And since then, it has been quite a journey. It's very difficult to start a nonprofit organization. You probably know this. And it takes some time because you really have to develop a reputation to get the funding that you need. And, even now, it's a good 7 years in, I still feel like I'm just getting the ball rolling with that, with regards to that.
Yeah, I think people have a lot of really great ideas and big hearts, and they dive into nonprofit work and then realize all of the other side of it that is incredibly difficult. So,
Yeah, I mean, and then just the administrative part of it, boards and forms and regulations and all of that, taxes and bookkeeping, and there's just that business aspect. So it's not only that passion part that you enjoy doing, there's just all of the background stuff. Plus, you got to raise the money too.
yes.
Fortunately, I've just been lucky that I've been able to do this, to be quite honest, because it's not a lucrative venture.
Yeah, people don't go into nonprofit because it's going to change their life financially or, any other monetary way. That's for
That's right,
sure.
right.
Well, I originally was drawn to your nonprofit and your story because you are doing really cool things with allowing students to get virtual experiences around STEM through the pandemic. And that was very fascinating. And I love the innovation there. But after we first started talking, it became very apparent that there was a much greater story that we needed to talk about. And that was the light that you shed on all the inequities that you've
Mm,
seen working with kids in some less fortunate communities. And
yes.
so I would love to just address that a little bit. And what are the most eye-opening things that you've noticed working with these children and the lack of access to great programming?
Well, the reason I even started my nonprofit was an experience I had in an urban school. And I didn't have much time. I was contracted to be there maybe 4 times in the summer for 1 hour, 1 hour a week for 4 weeks. And in my working with these young women in math, they were middle school students, some of that were going to high school. So they were eighth graders going to ninth grade in the fall. And there was this one young lady who was about to go to ninth grade, and we were playing a very simple math game, and she asked me, she said, Dr. Christopher, can you remind me what is division? And it was more like a 8 divided by 4. I'm not talking complicated division. She didn't understand the concept of division, and she was going into high school, and that's when it, like, a light bulb went off, and it was like, wait a minute, we're really not addressing the elephant in the room, which is these students need proficiency in math and science. Math is their math proficiency is bad in Grand Rapids. Only 8% of Black eighth graders are proficient in math. 8%. And in science, I'm at two schools that have middle school students, no science teachers. In the 21st century, how can you be competitive? When I had a science teacher in middle school and I went to some of these schools, what has happened so that these students in these communities do not have science, they don't have access to science teachers. They're not proficient in math, and we'll still be so much more focused on having a robotics team. And I'm thinking, let's get the basics, before we worry about some of these things that we consider STEM, but we're not understanding that science and math are an integral part of STEM, and you really cannot have a STEM career without proficiency in these subjects.
Mhm.
And so that's really what I was trying to address with my nonprofit. That really makes it different than a lot of other STEM programs that do no math. What is that about? I don't know.
Yeah, I fell in love with science in junior high, and I had some great teachers, and I can't
Okay.
imagine that not being a fundamental resource that would be available to me. That was
Yes.
never an option. Of course,
It-
you have science, and of course, you
you
have great math, because it's a fundamental math, especially of
Mhm.
being an adult. You use it so
Exactly.
much.
And if you want to go to college, and this is another thing, we wonder why these students are not proficient in math and science and how they can't get accepted into colleges, but we're not addressing their academic needs early enough. They shouldn't have to go into high school not proficient in math. They
Mhm.
shouldn't have to go into high school with never having had a science teacher. And the teachers that they do have, do you think they even have a budget for science supplies? No. So they can't do those cool dissections and things that we did in middle school, frogs and worms and all this kind of stuff. They can't even do these things because of honestly, I feel like the inequity in our communities, because there are communities in the Grand Rapids area where kids do have science teachers, but the
Yeah.
kids who are poor, children of color, they don't, their families don't know to advocate for them and these resources. And so they just get overlooked.
Mhm.
And these resources are sent to the schools that have parents who know that this is a requirement for them, and they don't expect anything less. And so I'm trying to say the same thing for the students that I work with. The students I work with, I want them to have access to the same opportunities as my children.
Mhm.
And that's really, it's not rocket science.
Right.
Yeah.
I think this conversation could go well beyond this normal 10-minute interview. Of course, it's a huge topic. And you brought up a great point, though, about parents advocating for their children.
Hmm.
Given that we can't come to a solution in a 10-minute interview by any means, what are just a couple immediate things that you feel parents and educators and administrators can do in the immediate term to try to make some sort of impactful change on this massive, um, it's bigger than just a problem, it's
Right.
a systemic issue.
Well, one of the things that I have found is that school districts do not publicize this information. I even put myself in a difficult position exposing this type of treatment, because they don't want people to know. So how are you going to get help if you've never even told people how bad the situation is? And there are challenges. There aren't enough science teachers. But does that mean we just say, oh, well, we don't have enough? And just, I'm not technically a science teacher. I'm not a certified teacher, but I am in a position to teach science with a PhD in engineering.
Mhm.
So there are resources, there are ways that we can do this, but people have to think outside of the box and not just give up so easily. Oh, well, and why aren't there more science teachers? Why are we not paying teachers what they're worth? Why
Right.
would, somebody who has a science education shouldn't have to take such a big pay cut to
Mhm.
be in education? So there's some larger issues that we should address as a community. Should we support school districts so that they can pay their educators a wage that is worthy of their time? So there's the diversity. There's a lack of diversity in education right now. So it's very important for students to have role models and teachers that look like them. And if we don't have that diversity, why don't we have that diversity? What are the barriers that we are putting up? Part of it is the salary issue that would keep a person of color, from entering the teaching profession. So, but let's you said, like, we can't we can't change those things. I cannot change that. You can't change it like overnight. But one thing I would say is definitely support, whatever the taxes, whatever you have to do so that these educational institutions have the money they need to hire quality people. You can also just, I wouldn't necessarily say volunteer, but if it's giving money, donating directly to schools, donating directly to foundations that support schools, so that they can get resources from an organization like mine, which is, outside of the school system, but still has a opportunity to support. And, again, it's just trying to, well, I'll put it this way. We will move out of a community to access the best education for our children. We will move to but not everybody can move.
Right.
So first, you just have to recognize there's a privilege to be able to just, I'm going to take my kids to the district that has the best outcomes.
Mhm.
And then not, but not to forget the kids who don't have that,
Mhm.
and not to kind of put yourself in a position of, well, they don't have that because they're not a hard worker, or they're not, these are hardworking people that they're just in a, they're just lack the knowledge. How would you know if the students I work with, they have nobody in their life that went to college? So how would they know? How would they know how to get on that path? Perhaps you can be a mentor. That's a possibility, but I don't recommend mentorship to everybody because it's quite an investment of time. And if you don't have the time to invest, then maybe you have the resources to invest. And like I said, make donations to the district, to the schools, or to people, or to organizations like STEM Greenhouse.
Mhm. Yeah, I think you make a really wonderful point that part of it is starting the conversation and awareness, but
Hmm.
also finding a way that's appropriate to get the conversation started, to give back. Sometimes throwing donations is not the solution, it's getting involved. And sometimes getting involved is not the best solution for you,
Exactly.
is using your financial resources. So finding that
well,
balance.
Well, for example, I often have companies and they want to, volunteer, but they're only looking to volunteer for an event.
Right.
The kids that I work with need help. I'm working with them all year long. So, so if like if you're a medical doctor, what is your time best spent cleaning your house, or is it doing your job? I mean, we all have to think about that. And similarly, for me, I would rather have the resources to hire a teacher than to have a volunteer come for a couple of hours and my students not really benefit. My
Right.
students are not really benefit from you coming to our STEM night
Yeah.
the way that they would benefit in you investing in them. Because if you really care, you will invest financially,
Mhm.
and so that they can have that teacher that will support them through their education.
Yeah, that qualified long-term resource.
Yeah, long term. And that was another, that's why I'm the greenhouse. Now, I don't physically have a greenhouse, but my whole idea with my organization was it would be an opportunity for kids to grow. You cannot grow in, I say it's similar to just tossing seeds to the wind. Oh, we have a STEM night, a coding day of coding. Do you think a day of coding is going to help children in poverty?
Mhm.
So
Right.
many of us are looking at things from our own perspective. Yes, a day of coding is good for our children because we have all the resources that we need. That if our child has an interest in coding, we can make that career happen. We have networks, and we know all about the coding camps. But what about the other child? That day of coding does very little to impact their lives. So I'm always trying to take a long-term approach. I've always wanted STEM Greenhouse to be a K-12 type of organization. Right now, we're primarily doing middle school programming. But why is that? That's just because um, the funding is not really there to do more, or the will to do more. We just, oh, okay, we'll just do a little middle school program, and we need more support than that because they're coming into middle school so far behind. I'm working at the third grade level with students in middle school,
Right.
and we need to be able to bring them up so that when they enter middle school, they're ready. When they enter high school, they're ready. And of course, they don't have to choose a career in STEM, but how can you choose a career in STEM if you don't have the skills?
Right.
So, yeah, it's just like our kids. I don't expect my children to become engineers, but I want them to have the education they need so that if they make the choice to go into these fields,
Mhm.
that they have that choice.
Yeah, absolutely. And it spills into other fields too. It's a fundamental across the board.
Exactly, exactly. We just, everybody, I think, when we think of what we want for our children, we know that we want them to be happy. But in order for them to be happy, we have to provide them with an education that will make them competitive.
Mhm.
And so, that's all I'm asking. I'm just advocating for kids and who really don't can't advocate for themselves.
Yeah.
And it's been quite a ride, but I feel like people are just starting to get it. They're like, okay, maybe there really is something to this, because all the money, the millions of dollars we have spent on STEM has not increased diversity in STEM.
Mhm.
I got my PhD 15 years ago. Why isn't there another Black person to get a PhD in agricultural engineering from the University of Illinois? Why was I only the third Black woman in the world to get a PhD in agricultural engineering? We are not addressing some root issues.
Mhm.
We're putting band-aids on cancers in our society. It's not going to work.
Absolutely. And I think you've already addressed, how people can support STEM Greenhouse and obviously give of yourself financially if that's in your
Yeah.
wheelhouse of what you're able to do. But I also encourage people to reach out and have a conversation with you because I feel like there's so many opportunities that one of
Yes.
the best ways is to have a conversation and see what the best fit is. Would
Well,
you
and
say
sometimes
other things?
it may not be money. It might be you have a network. You know somebody at a university that could help us. You know someone at an engineering firm that could help us, whether it's with supplies or having a location to do something, a special field trip. I mean, there's so many different ways that people can be supportive. And I have my website. I have my videos that I've created for on YouTube. So these are opportunities for people to maybe take a look at some of the things I'm doing and I'm working on, and just deciding if maybe they want to learn a little more.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I think this wraps up our interview for today. And I appreciate you starting a great conversation to hopefully help people get more involved in supporting the work that you're doing in STEM. So thank you so much for your time. And I look forward to seeing all the great things ahead for STEM Greenhouse.
All right, thank you so much.